Isaiah drove a midnight black luxury SUV, a stark contrast to the small, cozy coffee shop where he met me. He'd been taking me out for months, sometimes for impulsive weekend trips, quick flights to Miami, or a secluded cabin rental upstate. I'm an architect, and I take pride in my work. I'm fiercely independent, with a promising career and a busy office right in downtown Brooklyn. At 34, I've built my success on precision and setting clear boundaries, qualities I desperately need to maintain in this messy, high-stakes relationship with Isaiah. I carry myself with a quiet dignity, strong, that he finds both alluring and, quite frankly, very frustrating. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It felt like a courtship, but with an ugly asterisk. He was still married. I was firm, though. I wasn't just another fling for a wealthy man trying to escape his life. "You can buy me dinner, Isaiah, but you can't buy my peace," I'd told him once. He just smiled, that heartbreaking, confident grin that always seemed to promise a future he wasn't yet free to give. During those fancy getaways, the ambiance would shatter when his phone rang. He'd step onto the balcony, his voice low but sharp, arguing with his lawyer, Marcus. The fights were always about assets: the brownstone in Harlem, the portfolio of investment properties, the classic muscle cars. Isaiah was rich, undeniably. His success was impressive, but the price of his freedom seemed to be tied to splitting a fortune with his wife, Simone. I hated those calls. They were a constant, brutal reminder that I was only waiting on the sidelines. He'd come back inside, his jaw tight, running a hand over his trimmed beard. The moment he hung up, the calm, successful businessman vanished, replaced by a man simmering with resentment. He'd pace, gripping his empty glass. "Simone is trying to bleed me dry, Keisha. How can she demand the Brooklyn brownstone? I bought that place with my first big bonus, before we even decided to seriously merge our lives. That house is mine." His frustration was a dark cloud, and he'd vent about how calculating Simone was. He'd list the assets he felt he was already generous with: 2 luxury cars, a hefty trust fund set up for their 2 sons, and the monthly allowance that could fund a small business. Haven't I given her enough for her to start over? What more does she want? It's pure, selfish greed. I'd listen, trying to soothe the anger in his voice, urging him to focus on the legal end date, the finish line. "Just tell Marcus to settle it, Isaiah. Peace is more valuable than property." But the fight over money seemed to fuel his ego, making him cling tighter to every asset. It was a vicious cycle of pride and bitterness that stalled his freedom. The release of his anger always led to the same request: a turn in the mood that felt both desperate and predatory. Once the venom about Simone subsided, he'd lean in, his eyes softening with an artificial vulnerability. "I'm under so much stress, Keisha. This divorce, the market risk. I just need comfort. I need you." He would frame his desire not as lust, but as a plea for mercy. He'd ask me to stay, to show him the compassion his wife clearly couldn't. He made me feel like the oasis in his desert of tension. But I refused. Every single time. "Isaiah," I'd tell him, my voice flat, holding firm to the boundary I had drawn for my own self-respect. "You know my rule. I want you, but I will not be your side chick. Finish the divorce first. Everything else, us, our future, all the comfort you think you need, it can wait until you are a free man." The denial would put a temporary chill between us. I longed for him, a deep, frustrating ache that transcended the surface attractions. But the guilt was an iron collar. I knew he was still sleeping in the same house with the woman he claimed to despise, the mother of his children. Crossing that line would make me complicit in his betrayal, and I refused to live with that shadow. He'd already asked me to marry him, a stunning proposition delivered over an expensive bottle of wine on a quiet Tuesday evening. It was a gesture that should have been romantic, but it tasted of impatience and desperation. He was still legally bound to Simone. Keisha, you're my piece. You're the one I see next to me on the patio in our 60s. Why are we dragging this out? Say yes. Give me a reason to push Marcus to end this now. I appreciated the sentiment, truly, but I saw it as a desperate move to pressure the situation, both with me and his wife. You have two beautiful boys, Isaiah. I respect that. But until you walk out of that court with a single man, the answer is no. My primary focus wasn't our connection, which was intense and deep. It was the integrity of the separation. I needed him to handle his past life with honesty and finality. We stayed in that ambiguous, suspended state. Friends in public, deeply involved but physically restricted by a moral line I wouldn't cross. The months were an emotional minefield, a waiting game where every phone call, every court date delay was a crushing weight. The passion was there, confusing, palpable, and unmanaged. Attention stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but I was convinced my resolve was pushing him closer to the end. I felt like the keeper of his conscience, the one demanding that he do things the right way. One Friday evening, we were at a gallery opening downtown, surrounded by the kind of moneyed crowd Isaiah belonged to. The noise of the event was a low hum when his phone buzzed. It was Marcus, his lawyer. Isaiah immediately moved away from me, towards an empty corridor. His attempt to muffle the conversation was clear, but the silence between my heartbeats allowed me to catch one chilling, pivotal word: pregnancy. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. When he turned around, his face was a mask of shock and darkness, the light in his eyes completely extinguished. His mood had shifted from art-world charming to something trapped and venomous. I walked up to him, placing a hand on his arm, the concern genuine. Isaiah, what is it? What did Marcus say? He hesitated, looking away from my gaze, his hesitation a cruel form of confirmation. Then he whispered the unbelievable truth. Yes, Keisha, she's pregnant. The word pregnant felt like a physical blow. The noise of the gallery faded away. Everything I had been waiting for, everything I had denied myself, was crashing down. But the question that hit me was immediate and brutal. I stared at him, my voice a strangled whisper. Wait, she's pregnant? You're the one responsible? You mean while you were telling me your marriage was dead? While you were planning our wedding, you were still with her? The air was thick with the foul smell of his betrayal. He didn't answer right away. He just sighed, a long, self-pitying sound that was more about his inconvenience than my pain. Then he had the audacity to shift the blame, a move so repulsive it stripped away any lingering affection I had for him. He looked me straight in the eyes, his expression utterly serious. You should share some of the blame, Keisha. His words were a sickening blow, designed to evade accountability. If you hadn't been so rigid, if you'd just given in to me when I needed comfort, this wouldn't have happened. It's your fault for making me wait. Wait. Okay, stop. And then this. I almost laughed. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of his statement, that my insistence on his integrity and my commitment to morality was the cause of his infidelity and her subsequent pregnancy, was staggering. I stood there, stunned, processing the depths of his narcissism. He was trying to make my virtue my punishment. I had held the line, and now he was trying to paint me as the villain who drove him back to his wife's bed. It was a calculated, wicked twisting of the truth designed to make me swallow his guilt. For a flashing, insane moment, a twisted thought of relief crossed my mind. Maybe he's lying. Maybe the baby isn't his. Maybe this will be the final push for the divorce, a clean break. This hope, however dark, suggested a quicker end to my suffering. I was about to ask him to clarify, to plead with him to tell me it wasn't true, that he was just grasping at straws. But before I could form the words, he spoke again, trying to control the narrative. trying to minimize the monumental disaster he had created, which only solidified my horror. Isaiah rushed to mitigate the damage, to minimize the scale of his lapse. He clearly saw the shock and disgust on my face. "Keisha, it was just once," he insisted, his voice suddenly a panicked whine, completely lacking the authority of his business demeanor. He stepped closer, trying to take my hand, but I instinctively pulled back. "Listen to me. It was a moment of weakness, fueled by the stress I told you about. I was begging you for comfort, and you denied me," he continued, painting a narrative where he was the innocent victim. "She seduced me." He spat the words out as if they tasted bitter. Simone saw her chance. She knew exactly what she was doing. She's trying to use this pregnancy against me, to stop the divorce and keep a bigger piece of the estate. It's a calculated legal move, nothing more. But it won't work, Keisha. I swear, it won't work. This doesn't change anything for us. She's not getting back in. His desperate assurances were a paper-thin shield against the reality. He had betrayed me, and my carefully constructed hope for a future with him was now collateral damage. That final statement was strong. "It's just once she seduced me," was the precise moment something fundamental and essential broke inside me. It wasn't the pregnancy itself, though that was a sharp pain. It was the absolute lack of remorse, the quick pivot to victimhood, and the disgusting effort to lay his moral failure at my feet. The man I had loved, the man I had waited for, was not a wounded soul needing comfort. He was a self-serving coward who couldn't take responsibility for his own actions. The years I had spent holding my breath, the interval battles I had fought to keep my boundaries intact, suddenly felt like a joke. He hadn't just cheated. He had poisoned my self-worth by suggesting my fidelity was a mistake. My mind went quiet, numb. There was no need for yelling, no need for tears, no need for a dramatic scene. The love I felt for him, which had been a slow, intense burn, simply extinguished. I looked at him, the expensive suit, the panicked eyes, the beautiful lie he represented, and I knew I was done. There was no future to fight for, just an escape route I had to take. The silence that followed was deafening, a thick blanket of finality. Isaiah was still talking, still explaining, still weaving his flimsy tale of seduction and greed, trying to reassure me that I was still the one. But his voice sounded distant, like an echo from a broken radio. I simply turned away. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't argue. I didn't even correct him on his monstrous accusation. My exit needed to be as final as the realization that had just hit me. I walked quietly out of the gallery, past the laughing, unaware crowd, and into the cold Manhattan night. I hailed a cab, the luxury of the evening's beginning replaced by the harsh reality of the back seat. I went home and disconnected. I blocked his number, his email, and all his social media profiles. I stepped back completely, withdrawing from his life and the toxic drama he had created. From a distance, I watched the wreckage of their divorce proceedings continue to unfold in the local society pages, now complicated by the arrival of a new, unforeseen heir. I had gone from being the potential wife to an invisible, detached observer. The waiting game was over, but my pain was just beginning. The news of Simone's unexpected pregnancy became the talk of their social circle, and eventually the fuel for ruthless gossip columns. The divorce, which had been inching along, slammed to an immediate, screeching halt. The legal battle over the assets, the brownstone, the trusts, the overseas accounts, suddenly took a backseat to the biological reality of a new child. Isaiah was furious, but also trapped. The arrival of a new baby meant a fresh set of obligations, new legal leverage for Simone, and a massive complication to his desire for a quick, clean exit. I didn't reach out. I couldn't. I needed the distance to heal and to rebuild the self-respect he had attempted to dismantle. But I couldn't completely avoid the updates. My friend, Nia, still moved in some of the same circles, and became my reluctant news source. She would call with updates, whispers about a massive hospital bill, rumors of tense meetings between the lawyers, and Simone's calculated decision to lean into the narrative of the fragile mother betrayed. It was a masterclass in PR and legal maneuvering, and I watched, grimly satisfied, as Isaiah, the great manipulator, was being publicly outmaneuvered by the very woman he called greedy. Simone, I quickly realized, was not just fighting for money. She was fighting for revenge. The baby was her ultimate trump card. She knew exactly how to use the situation to inflict maximum emotional and financial damage on Isaiah. She wasn't asking for a fair settlement anymore. She was demanding a pound of flesh. She demanded the full, exclusive ownership of the Harlem brownstone, stating she needed the stability for 3 children now. She insisted on a massive increase in the trust funds and child support, all leveraged on the basis of protecting her newborn son. The tension in their lives, which I was thankfully no longer a part of, was palpable even from afar. I heard that Isaiah was spiraling, losing his composure in front of his board members, and becoming erratic with his business dealings. The financial and emotional pressure was unbearable for him, a direct consequence of his own lack of discipline and moral integrity. I felt a cold, hard sense of vindication. He had tried to blame me for his mess, but the mess was now consuming him entirely. Eventually, the baby arrived. A healthy boy, a new little soul completely innocent of the chaos and betrayal surrounding his birth. This arrival sealed the coffin on the divorce. With a 3rd child, the court would view the family unit differently. The legal and financial implications were too vast for a clean break. The concept of an amicable settlement was dead, replaced by a lifelong, complicated entanglement. The divorce was officially pulled from the court calendar. The marriage never ended. I felt a profound, exhausting sadness for the woman I had been, the one who had held on to the dream of a future with him. That woman was gone. The present Keisha was focused on recovery. I had to consciously dismantle the parts of my life I had structured around waiting for him. I changed my routines, started painting again, and focused relentlessly on my career. The betrayal had left a scar, but it also granted me a terrible clarity. I finally saw Isaiah not as a damaged lover, but as a man who would always prioritize his own convenience over the truth. Several months passed, marked only by the silence between us. My self-imposed exile was absolute. No calls, no texts, no check-ins. Not even a courtesy reply to his lawyers' frantic attempts to relay important personal messages, which I knew were just veiled pleas from Isaiah. I made a new life, a life free from the suspense of waiting. I learned to breathe again without checking my phone every 5 minutes. Then, one Sunday morning, Nia called, her voice a mix of shock and intrigue. She didn't even need to ask if I had seen it. The social media explosion was undeniable. Simone had posted a series of professional, high-quality family photos. They were stunning. Isaiah, Simone, and their 3 sons were all dressed in matching, elegant ivory white outfits. They were standing in front of the Brooklyn brownstone, not as warring parties, but as a united, picture-perfect family. Isaiah had his arm tightly around Simone's waist, and they were both beaming, a display of marital bliss that looked absolutely genuine. The images were a masterpiece of curated deception. They weren't just smiling. They were radiating a deep, settled happiness, the kind of look that takes years of commitment, not months of bitter legal warfare. It was the visual confirmation that my waiting, my resolve, and my guilt had been utterly meaningless. Isaiah had returned to his wife, not just physically, but seemingly emotionally. The man who had been raging about his greedy wife and promising me eternal happiness was now presenting himself to the world as a devoted husband and father. The knife twisted with the realization that the ivory white outfits were a symbol of their renewed vows, a silent, public declaration that the crisis was over and the marriage had been saved. Simone had won, not only the property, but the man himself, and she was gloating, beautifully, publicly. I felt a sudden, sharp sting of a new emotion. Cold, pure betrayal. A betrayal not just of our relationship, but of the truth he had claimed to live by. This image was his final, silent communication to me. He had chosen convenience and family structure over me. Seeing the photos, I knew I had to do something. Not for him, but for my own sense of closure. It was the final step in proving to myself that I was fully released from his orbit. I drafted a short, impeccably polite message. I kept it professional, emotionless, and entirely focused on the image of the family he had salvaged. It was the hardest text I'd ever composed. Isaiah, I saw the photos. I'm genuinely glad you and Simone were able to reconcile and that the boys have their parents together. Congratulations on the new addition to your family. I wish you all peace. It was a final act of grace towards the broken dream, a way of proving to myself that I was the bigger person. I hit send, tossed my phone onto the sofa, and tried to forget about it. I expected no reply, or perhaps a formal thank you from Simone, who likely monitored his communications now. What I received less than an hour later, however, was a final, stunning display of his twisted moral compass. My phone buzzed, and my heart hammered an uneven rhythm. It was a reply from Isaiah. I picked it up, expecting a confirmation of his happiness, a polite wave goodbye. Instead, the screen displayed a chilling, single line of text. It was devoid of apology, of kindness, or of any acknowledgement of the pain he had caused me. It was pure, distilled resentment, the ultimate proof of his failure to evolve. It's all your fault. That was it. 3 simple, damning words. After all the chaos, the lies, the broken promises, the pregnancy, the reconciliation, and the triumphant public display of family unity, he still couldn't take responsibility. He chose to throw the entire ugly failure of their divorce and the creation of their third child back onto my refusal to be his mistress. The message was clear. If I had been compliant, if I had compromised my values, he wouldn't have had to go back to his wife, and he wouldn't have been trapped. It was the most brutal, cutting form of love betrayal I had ever experienced. The message was a gift, a final, undeniable confirmation of the bullet I had dodged. It erased any lingering doubt, any residual feeling of what if. It replaced heartbreak with a cold, solid clarity. I realized that my refusal to compromise had not driven him away. It had simply revealed who he truly was. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for an escape, an accessory to his midlife crisis, and someone to blame when the escape failed. I suddenly understood Simone's rage. She wasn't just greedy. She was a woman fighting for her stability against a selfish man who had tried to abandon his family for the promise of a guilt-free new start. My pity for her, which had been minimal, increased tenfold. We were both victims of the same narcissist, but she was the one who fought and won the structural battle for her children. I just fought and won the moral one for my soul. The irony was suffocating. Strong men can lie, but the truth eventually leaves a paper trail. Everything gets paper trailed. I deleted the last text message, not because it was painful, but because it was irrelevant. My revenge would not be dramatic. It would be quiet, prosperous, and utterly detached from his miserable orbit. I realized that the true triumph was my freedom from the waiting game, from the guilt, and most importantly, from him. I focused every ounce of energy into my work, using the fire of the betrayal to fuel my ambition. Within a year, I secured a major promotion, doubling my salary and giving me the financial independence to buy my own small, beautiful place. A home that was 100% mine, free from shared titles and emotional baggage. My life was no longer suspended, waiting for a court date. It was moving, thriving, and deeply peaceful. I started dating again, choosing men who were honest, emotionally available, and completely, blessedly single. I looked better, I felt better, and my spirit, once dimmed by the waiting, now shone with genuine, unburdened happiness. Years later, I saw Isaiah again, not in person, but in a small, unflattering article buried in the business section. His name was mentioned in connection with a messy legal entanglement concerning one of his investment properties. The accompanying, dated photo showed him looking tired, heavier, and completely devoid of the sharp confidence he once wore like a suit. He was still married to Simone, of course, a lifetime commitment sealed by their youngest child. But the article hinted at a life of constant internal strife, relentless legal battles with a wife who never stopped fighting for her share, and a marriage held together by obligation, not love. I closed the browser, feeling nothing but a profound sense of relief. He had chosen money, convenience, and the illusion of family stability. I had chosen freedom, truth, and peace. He might have the house and the fortune, but he was trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, forever bound to the resentment of a marriage he tried to flee. I, Keisha, was truly free, and as I looked out the window of my own home, a quiet, satisfied smile touched my lips. Men can lie, but fate, in the end, collects its debts. Click on the next story waiting for you on screen. Because trust me, the betrayals only get darker from here.